Naomi worked long hours in the hospital. The building was always filled with the sound of footsteps, the beeping of machines and voices calling for help. Yet even in the noise she tried to give every patient a sense of calm. She was known as the nurse who listened, the nurse who never rushed. Her heart was soft, and she treated strangers as if they were her own family. One evening, after finishing her usual rounds, she entered a quiet room at the end of the hall. In that bed lay Kwame, an elderly man with a thin frame and silver hair. His hands were shaky, his breath slow, but his eyes carried warmth. Many patients at the hospital were often restless, angry, or afraid, but Kwame was different. He smiled even through his pain, and he always greeted Naomi with respect. "Good evening, Naomi," he whispered when she walked in. Naomi returned the smile and checked his vitals. "How are you feeling today, Mr. Kwame?" "Call me Kwame," he said gently. "I feel weak, but I am grateful to see another day." Naomi admired that about him. He never complained, even when the pain was clear on his face. He spoke to the other nurses kindly, and he even joked sometimes, making the staff laugh when the days felt heavy. Naomi began to look forward to her visits to his room. That evening, after checking his medicine, she sat beside him for a moment. "Is there anything you need?" she asked softly. Kwame was silent for a while. His eyes moved to the window where the night sky was visible above the city lights. Then he turned back to Naomi, his voice quieter than before. "I have a last wish," he said. Naomi felt her heart tighten. She knew what it meant when patients used those words. She leaned closer, giving him her full attention. "Tell me," she whispered. Kwame's lips curved into a faint smile. "Before I leave this world, there is something I must do, or at least something I must see again." Naomi stayed silent, waiting. "I grew up far away in a small village in Ghana," Kwame began, his eyes soft with memory. "Life was simple there. I was poor, but I had a family and I had dreams. One of my happiest memories is sitting near the old baobab tree with my sister. We would talk about life, about what we wanted to be, about the future. When I came to America, I thought I would return one day. But years passed. My sister and I lost contact. I don't even know if she is still alive." His voice trembled, but he continued. "If I could have one wish, it would be to know what happened to her. To hear her voice even once before my time is over." Naomi felt her throat tighten. She had cared for many patients, but Kwame's request struck her deeply. It was not about riches, not about fame, not even about comfort. It was about family, about love that had not faded with time. "I don't know if such a wish can be granted," Kwame said, almost as if apologizing for asking. "But I wanted to share it with you. Because you listen. Because you care." Naomi reached out and touched his hand gently. "I will do what I can," she said. Kwame looked at her with surprise. "You would help me?" "I will try," Naomi promised. "You are not alone, Kwame. Not while I am here." For the first time she saw his eyes glisten with tears. He nodded slowly. "Then my heart is lighter already." The moment stayed with Naomi even after her shift ended. She walked home through the cool night air, her mind filled with thoughts of Kwame. His words echoed in her heart. "My sister, my last wish." That night, Naomi could not sleep easily. She kept wondering how she could possibly help him. She was just a nurse, not a detective, not someone with power. But she knew she could not ignore his request. The kindness in his eyes, the dignity with which he carried his pain, it was impossible to walk away from that. In the following days, Naomi spent more time with Kwame. She asked him gently about his past, writing down the little details he remembered. The name of his sister. The village where they once lived. The stories of the baobab tree and the fields they played in. Kwame's voice grew stronger when he spoke of his childhood, as if memory gave him energy. Sometimes he would close his eyes and describe the sound of drums in the evenings, or the way his sister laughed when she ran through the rain. Naomi listened carefully, imagining every picture he painted. "You speak as if you are still there," she told him one day. "In my heart I never left," Kwame replied. Each time Naomi left his room, she carried a new sense of duty. She began searching online, reading about villages in Ghana, about communities, about ways to trace family. It was not easy, but she refused to give up. For Kwame, each evening became brighter because Naomi came with questions and hope. He would smile at her determination. "You remind me of my sister," he said once. "She too never gave up on me." Naomi blushed at the words, but deep inside she felt honored. One night, as Kwame lay quietly in bed, Naomi sat by his side. She noticed his breathing was slower, weaker than before. She felt a wave of urgency. Time was running out. Hold on, Kwame, she whispered. I promise I will do everything I can. Kwame opened his eyes, tired but still shining. Even if you cannot find her, he said softly, you have already given me peace. You listened when no one else did. That is enough for me. Naomi shook her head gently. No, Kwame. Your last wish matters. And I believe there is a way. Somehow we will find her. The old man smiled faintly, and his hand tightened around hers. Then I trust you, he whispered. Naomi stayed beside him until he fell asleep, watching his chest rise and fall. She realized in that moment that this was no longer just a patient she was helping. This was a man who had given her a new purpose, a new reason to believe in the power of care. Outside, the city lights of Chicago glowed, but Naomi's mind was far away, imagining a village under a wide African sky, a baobab tree, and a sister waiting without knowing her brother still remembered her. And so began Naomi's quiet mission, to turn an old man's last wish into reality, no matter how impossible it seemed. The next evening when Naomi entered Kwame's room, he looked a little stronger than before. His eyes lit up when he saw her, as if he had been waiting. She sat by his side with her usual gentle smile, ready to listen. You know, Naomi, Kwame said in a soft voice, many years ago I had a bakery. Naomi's eyebrows rose in surprise. A bakery? Yes, Kwame replied. His lips curved in a small smile. It was on the south side of Chicago. Not big, not fancy. Just a small shop. But oh, the smell of bread in the morning. People would line up for it. I was proud of that place. It was my dream come true. Naomi leaned forward, curious. She had never heard this part of his story before. What happened to it? Kwame's smile faded and his eyes turned distant. I lost it. Life is not always kind. Bills, competition, and hard times. The bakery closed many years ago. But sometimes late at night I still dream of the oven's warmth, the flour on my hands, and the sound of people laughing as they waited for fresh bread. Naomi listened carefully, her heart full. She could almost picture the little bakery, the smell of bread, and the joy Kwame must have felt back then. There was one recipe, Kwame continued, his voice soft and full of memory. My special bread. Simple, but people loved it. I created it myself. If I could taste that bread once more before I go, I would be happy. Naomi's eyes grew warm. So your last wish is to taste your bread again? Kwame nodded slowly. Yes. Not money, not gold, not anything else. Just that bread. One more bite and I will know I lived well. Naomi reached for his hand. Then we will make it happen, she promised. Kwame looked at her with disbelief at first. Then his eyes softened with gratitude. You would try? I will not just try, Naomi said. I will do it. But as she walked home later, Naomi realized the challenge she had placed on herself. She had never baked bread before. Cooking simple meals at home was one thing, but bread? And not just any bread, Kwame's special recipe. How could she do it? That night she could not stop thinking. She searched online for bread recipes, reading step by step, but none of them sounded like his bread. She knew it had to be different, unique, made with care. She wished she had the recipe, but Kwame was too weak to write much down. The next day she asked him again about it. Can you tell me how you made your bread, Kwame? His eyes brightened as he began to explain. His hands trembled as he made small motions in the air, as if kneading invisible dough. It started simple. Flour, yeast, water, salt. But the secret was love and patience. I always said bread is alive. You must listen to it, feel it. You knead it until it speaks back to your hands. And when it rises you must not rush. Let it breathe, let it grow. Naomi listened carefully, writing everything down in her small notebook. He described how he added honey instead of sugar, and how he brushed the top with butter after baking so the crust would shine. His voice grew stronger as he spoke, like a man reliving his youth. I can almost smell it again, Kwame said, closing his eyes. If you could bring that smell to this room, Naomi, I would die a happy man. Naomi smiled, though her heart ached. Then you will smell it, she said firmly. The following evening, Naomi went to a small grocery store after work. She bought flour, yeast, honey, and butter. Standing in line with the ingredients, she felt nervous but determined. She was going to bake bread for the first time in her life. Her small apartment kitchen became her new workshop. She placed the ingredients on the counter and opened her notebook where Kwame's words were written. Flour, yeast, water, salt, honey, she whispered to herself. She mixed everything in a bowl, her hands clumsy at first. Flour spilled, water dripped, and the dough stuck to her fingers like glue. But she kept working, remembering Kwame's words. Bread is alive. You must listen to it. 4 hours, Naomi kneaded the dough, pressing it with her palms, folding and stretching. Her arms ached, but she refused to give up. When the dough finally became smooth, she placed it in a bowl to rise. She sat by the counter, staring at the dough as if waiting for a miracle. And then, it rose. Slowly, softly, like it was breathing. Naomi felt a thrill of joy. She whispered, "You are alive." When it was ready, she shaped it carefully and placed it in the oven. The smell began to spread through the small apartment, warm and sweet. Naomi closed her eyes, imagining Kwame's bakery. She could almost hear the laughter and footsteps of his customers. When the bread finally came out, it was golden brown. She brushed the top with butter, just as Kwame had said. The crust glistened, and the smell filled every corner of her home. Naomi stood there for a long time, staring at the loaf with pride. It was not perfect, but it was real. The next day, Naomi carried the bread to the hospital in a small box. Her hands trembled with both excitement and fear. What if it did not taste right? What if she had failed? When she entered Kwame's room, he looked at her curiously. "What do you have there?" Naomi smiled nervously and opened the box. "Your bread," she whispered. For a moment, Kwame simply stared. His eyes grew wide and his lips parted in wonder. You baked it?" "Yes," Naomi said, placing the loaf gently on the table. "I tried to follow everything you told me." Kwame's eyes filled with tears. His frail hands reached out, and Naomi carefully cut a slice, placing it in his hand. He lifted it slowly to his mouth, took a bite, and closed his eyes. There was silence in the room. Naomi held her breath, waiting. And then tears rolled down Kwame's cheeks. This is my bread," he whispered. His voice shook, but it was full of joy. "You brought it back to me." Naomi felt her own eyes sting with tears. She smiled through them. "I am glad, Kwame." He looked at her, his face glowing with peace. "You don't know what this means. For a moment I am young again. I'm back in my bakery. I can hear the laughter, smell the ovens, feel the joy. You gave me my dream once more." Naomi reached out and held his hand. "It is your bread, Kwame. It always was." That night, Kwame slept with a smile on his face. Naomi watched him quietly, feeling that something bigger than herself had happened. She had given him not just bread but a piece of his life back. And in her heart, she knew this was only the beginning of their journey together. Naomi could not stop thinking about Kwame's words. Even though he had enjoyed the bread she baked earlier, she knew deep inside it was not exactly the same as the bread he used to make. He had smiled, yes, but Naomi had noticed the way his eyes grew distant, as if he were searching for a memory that was just out of reach. She wanted to give him not just a reminder but the real taste of his past. The next morning, Naomi decided she needed to find someone who had known Kwame's bakery long ago. Someone who might still remember the original recipe. It was not easy. Years had passed since the bakery had closed, and many people in the neighborhood had moved away or forgotten. But Naomi was determined. On her day off, she took the train to the south side of Chicago. The streets were busy, filled with cars, children running, and vendors selling food on the sidewalks. Naomi walked slowly, scanning every corner as if she were searching for ghosts of the past. She found the spot where Kwame's bakery once stood. It was now a small clothing shop with bright dresses hanging in the window. Naomi stood outside for a moment, imagining the smell of bread that must have filled the street many years ago. She went inside and asked the shopkeeper, an elderly woman with kind eyes, if she remembered the bakery. "Oh, Kwame's place?" the woman said with a smile. "Yes, I remember. He made the best bread I ever tasted. People came from all over just to buy it." Naomi's heart leapt. "Do you know anyone who might still have his recipe?" The woman shook her head sadly. "I don't. But you should try speaking to Abina. She lived next door to him for many years. If anyone remembers, it would be her." With a grateful smile, Naomi asked for directions and soon found herself standing outside a small brick house. She knocked gently. After a few minutes, the door opened and an old woman stepped out. She wore a shawl and leaned slightly on a cane. Her eyes, however, were sharp and bright. "Yes?" the woman asked. "Are you Abina?" Naomi asked politely. "Yes, I am. My name is Naomi. I'm a nurse and I take care of Kwame at the hospital," she explained softly. "He often talks about his bakery. He told me about his special bread. I am trying to make it for him, but I don't have the real recipe. I was told you might remember it." At the mention of Kwame's name, Abina's face softened. "Ah, Kwame? A good man. I still remember the smell of his bread every morning. I used to buy a loaf almost every day. Yes, I remember the recipe. How could I forget?" Naomi's heart filled with relief. Would you please share it with me? It would mean so much to him. Abina nodded and invited Naomi inside. The house was cozy, with the smell of herbs and the sound of a small radio playing softly in the background. They sat at a wooden table and Abina began to speak slowly, recalling every detail. He always used honey instead of sugar, Abina said. But the secret was in the spices. He added a little nutmeg and cinnamon. Not too much, just enough to give warmth. And he used milk instead of water sometimes to make it softer. That bread was like no other. It was not just food. It was comfort. Naomi carefully wrote down everything in her notebook. She listened with full attention, afraid to miss even a single word. When Abina finished, Naomi felt tears prick her eyes. Thank you. You don't know how much this means. Abina reached out and squeezed Naomi's hand. Do it for him. He gave so much joy with that bread. If you bring it back to him, it will be like giving him his life again. That night, Naomi went home with a bag full of ingredients. She was tired from the long day, but she refused to rest. She rolled up her sleeves and set to work in her little kitchen once again. She mixed the flour, yeast, and milk, adding honey just as Abina had described. She sprinkled in the spices carefully, breathing in their warm scent. It was not easy. The dough was stubborn at first, sticking to her hands and making a mess on the counter. But Naomi kept working, kneading with all her strength, her arms aching as she folded and pressed. She whispered to herself, "This is for you, Kwame. I will not fail." Hours passed. The dough finally rose, soft and full, just as she hoped. She shaped it carefully and placed it in the oven. When the bread baked, the smell filled her apartment, sweet, warm, and rich with spice. Naomi closed her eyes, and for a moment she felt as if she had stepped into the past, standing in Kwame's bakery among happy customers. When the bread came out, it was beautiful, golden, shiny with butter, and fragrant with nutmeg and cinnamon. Naomi held the loaf in her hands and smiled. This time she knew it was right. The next morning, Naomi carried the bread carefully to the hospital. Her hands trembled as she entered Kwame's room. He was awake, his face pale but his eyes full of curiosity. "What do you have there, Naomi?" he asked. Naomi smiled and placed the bread on the table. "This is your bread, Kwame. The real one. I found Abina, your old neighbor. She remembered the recipe. I baked it for you." Kwame's eyes widened. He stared at the loaf, his lips trembling. "Abina? She remembered?" His voice cracked with emotion. Naomi cut a slice and placed it gently in his hand. He lifted it slowly, his fingers shaking, and took a small bite. The room fell silent. Naomi watched his face carefully. Kwame chewed slowly, his eyes closing. A tear rolled down his cheek. Then he smiled, soft, wide, full of peace. "Yes," he whispered. "This is it. This is my bread." Naomi felt her heart swell. She could see the joy in his eyes, the way his shoulders relaxed, the way his spirit seemed lighter. He took another bite and his smile grew brighter. "It tastes like home," Kwame said. "Like the mornings in my bakery. Like the laughter of neighbors. You brought it all back, Naomi. You gave me more than bread. You gave me my life again." Naomi's eyes filled with tears, but she smiled through them. "I only followed your recipe, Kwame. The bread was always yours." Kwame reached out and held her hand tightly. "No, my dear. You gave me this gift. You gave me my dream one more time." That night, as Naomi left the hospital, she felt both exhausted and fulfilled. She had struggled, she had failed, and she had tried again until she succeeded. And now she knew, this was more than just bread. It was memory, love, and legacy. Kwame sat quietly in his hospital bed, holding the slice of bread Naomi had baked. The golden crust still shone faintly from the butter she had brushed on top, and the soft center carried the warmth of honey and spice. He took another bite slowly, savoring every bit as though he was tasting not only food but time itself. His hands trembled slightly as he lowered the bread onto the plate. His eyes, filled with tears, drifted toward the window where the evening sun painted the sky with orange and pink. Naomi, who had been watching him closely, felt a tightness in her chest. She had never seen such an expression, pain and joy mingling together. She stepped closer and asked softly, "Kwame, are you all right?" For a long moment he did not answer. He wiped at his tears and let out a shaky laugh. "This bread," he whispered, his voice low and thick with emotion, "it is not just bread. Naomi, there is something I never told anyone at this hospital. My bakery, it was never just a shop." Naomi tilted her head, her curiosity rising. "What do you mean?" Kwame's eyes grew distant, like he was staring into the past. "When I opened my bakery years ago, Times were hard for many families. The South Side was full of people who worked long hours but still struggled to feed their children. Every day, mothers would come to the shop with tired eyes and empty purses. Some fathers stood outside, ashamed, because they had no money for even a single loaf. Naomi's breath caught in her throat as she listened. She could almost see the picture he was painting. Lines of worried faces, hungry children peeking through their parents' arms, all waiting for help. Kwame continued, his voice trembling but steady. I made a decision back then. Every night after selling what I could, I baked extra loaves. In the morning when no one was looking, I slipped bread into the hands of those who had nothing. Sometimes I left it at their doors. Sometimes I handed it to the children directly and told them to run home with it. No one knew it was me. To most people I was just another baker. But in truth, he paused, another tear sliding down his cheek. In truth, the bakery was my way of keeping people alive. Naomi's hand went to her mouth. Her eyes widened with shock, then softened with awe. You gave free bread to the families? Kwame nodded. Yes. I could never watch children starve. I could never let a mother go home empty-handed. The bread you made for me tonight, it tastes exactly like those loaves. It carries the same memory. That is why I cried. Because it is not just food. It is a piece of my story, a secret I carried for many years. Naomi felt her heart swell with emotion. Suddenly, the simple loaf she had baked became something far greater. It was no longer just a recipe, it was a symbol of kindness, sacrifice, and love. She pulled up a chair and sat beside Kwame, her eyes glistening. Kwame, she said softly, why did you never tell anyone? The world should have known what you did. He chuckled weakly. Ah, my dear. Kindness does not always need an audience. Those families knew. That was enough for me. I did not want praise. I wanted children to sleep with full stomachs. That was my reward. Naomi blinked back tears. She thought about her own life, how often people did things for recognition, for applause, for titles. Yet here was a man who had given so much and carried it quietly without ever seeking thanks. It humbled her deeply. For a long time the two of them sat in silence. Kwame's breathing was heavy but his smile was peaceful. Naomi finally spoke. Kwame, do you know what this means? You weren't just a baker. You were a hero in your community. Maybe you didn't wear a cape, but you saved people. You saved children. Kwame laughed again, though it was soft and tired. A hero? No. Just an old man with flour on his hands. But Naomi shook her head firmly. No, Kwame. You are more than that. And I think people deserve to remember what you did. Maybe the children you once helped are adults now. Maybe they still remember the bread you gave them. Kwame's eyes grew wet again and he whispered, if they remember, then I am happy. That is enough for me. Naomi placed her hand gently over his. His skin was frail, the veins showing clearly, but his grip was strong with gratitude. Thank you for telling me, she said. I will never forget this story. And I promise you, others will know too. Kwame sighed deeply, his body relaxing as though a heavy weight had been lifted. For so long I thought it was just my secret. But now that I have shared it with you, I feel lighter. It is good to tell someone before I go. Naomi swallowed hard. She knew what he meant. Time was short, but his spirit seemed brighter than ever. That night, after finishing her shift, Naomi walked home under the cold Chicago sky. Her mind was full of Kwame's story. She thought of the bread, the families, the children running home with warm loaves in their arms. She imagined mothers whispering prayers of thanks, never knowing the full truth. She realized something else too. Kwame had not only given bread, he had given hope. And now, through his story, Naomi carried that hope forward. When she reached her apartment, she sat at her small table and opened her notebook. She began to write down every word Kwame had told her. The secret loaves, the hungry children, the quiet kindness. She wanted to keep it safe, not only in her memory but in words that could live on. As she wrote, she whispered to herself, his story must be told. People must know who Kwame was. The night grew long and Naomi finally leaned back, her eyes tired but her heart burning with purpose. She looked at the loaf of bread she had saved from earlier, resting on a plate in her kitchen. She smiled, knowing it was more than bread, it was a symbol. And she promised herself that this was only the beginning. The hospital room was quiet, except for the soft sound of the heart monitor. Naomi sat beside Kwame's bed, holding his hand. His breathing was slow, but his face was calm. He no longer looked like a man fighting against pain, but like someone ready to rest after a long, hard journey. Naomi whispered gentle words, though she did not know if he could still hear her. She thanked him for his stories, for his kindness, and for trusting her with the secret of his bakery. Moments later, Kwame took one final deep breath and released it softly. His chest did not rise again. The monitor gave a long, steady sound. Naomi's eyes filled with tears, but she did not let go of his hand. She squeezed it tightly and whispered, "Rest now, Kwame. You gave the world your best. I promise your story will live on." For a long time she sat in silence, her heart heavy but full of determination. She had lost a friend, but she knew she had gained a mission. Kwame's life had been about quiet kindness, and now it was her duty to make sure the world remembered it. The next day, Naomi went back to her apartment, carrying the notebook where she had written Kwame's story. She could not stop thinking about the bakery, the little shop on Chicago's South Side that had once been more than a business. She imagined the warm smell of bread filling the streets, the lines of families, the children with bright eyes running home with loaves in their hands. Naomi decided she could not keep this story to herself. She began by sharing it with her colleagues at the hospital. They listened with surprise, then with admiration as she described how Kwame had secretly given bread to struggling families. Some nurses cried quietly, realizing they had cared for a man far greater than they knew. Doctors nodded with respect. One of the nurses said softly, "We must tell the community. People need to know what he did." Encouraged, Naomi reached out to local journalists. She wrote letters and shared the story she had carefully written down. At first she was not sure anyone would pay attention. But soon, one small article appeared in a neighborhood paper, telling of the quiet hero baker. The article spread quickly. People who had once lived in the South Side began to remember. Messages began to pour in. Some adults wrote that when they were children, they had received bread left mysteriously at their doors. Others remembered a kind baker who never turned them away, even when they had no money. Many cried as they finally learned the truth, that it had been Kwame all along. Naomi smiled as she read the letters. She realized Kwame had not only fed people, he had planted memories of hope that still lived in their hearts decades later. His kindness had never died. The community soon gathered to honor him. Volunteers came together, inspired by his story, and they decided to reopen Kwame's old bakery. The shop had been closed for years, its windows dusty, its sign faded. But now it came alive again. Painters restored the walls, carpenters fixed the counters, and bakers filled the ovens with warm, golden loaves. Above the door they placed a new sign that read, "Kwame's Bread of Hope." Naomi stood outside on the day of the reopening, watching as the first customers entered. Some were children holding their parents' hands. Others were elderly people who remembered the bakery from long ago. Every person who walked in was welcomed with warmth, and just as Kwame had done, anyone without money was given bread for free. Inside, the smell of fresh bread filled the air, just as it had in the past. Naomi closed her eyes and felt as if Kwame himself was there, smiling at the joy his bakery brought once again. Word spread across Chicago. People from different neighborhoods came to see the bakery, to hear the story of the man who had quietly saved so many. Schools began to teach children about Kwame, not as a patient in a hospital, but as a symbol of what true kindness meant. Naomi often returned to the bakery after her hospital shifts. She helped serve bread, greet families, and tell Kwame's story to anyone who asked. Each time she stepped inside, she remembered the day she had baked bread for him, nervous and unsure, never realizing how important it would become. One evening, while closing the shop, Naomi looked at the photo of Kwame that now hung on the wall. It showed him as a younger man, standing proudly in front of his bakery, flour on his apron and a smile on his face. She whispered, "You see, Kwame? They remember you now. Your kindness didn't die with you. It lives on." Over time, the bakery became more than a place for food. It became a center for community gatherings. Volunteers organized programs to teach children how to bake, sharing Kwame's recipe as a lesson not only in cooking but in generosity. Families in need knew they could always come there for help. The spirit of giving spread far beyond the walls of the shop. Naomi herself changed through this journey. She had once been just a nurse doing her duty, but now she felt she carried a piece of Kwame's heart with her. She learned that kindness, no matter how small, could ripple outward and touch lives in ways she could never imagine. Years later, when people in Chicago told the story of Kwame, they did not just talk about bread. They spoke of dignity, compassion, and the power of quiet generosity. Naomi's name was often mentioned too, as the nurse who had brought Kwame's final wish to life and ensured his legacy was never forgotten. Naomi never stopped visiting the bakery. Sometimes she sat near the window with a loaf in her hands, watching the people outside. Children laughed, adults smiled, and families shared meals together. Every time she saw them, she felt Kwame's presence near. And in those moments she always remembered his last words about kindness needing no audience. Yet, in the end, his story found its way to the world, not because he sought recognition but because kindness once given never truly dies. Kwame had passed peacefully, but his life continued to shine like a light in the city. Naomi had kept her promise. She had turned his last wish into something much greater than either of them had imagined. And through her, Kwame's quiet gift of bread became a gift that fed hearts and souls for generations.